In this lesson, we're going to learn about time series. And time series is basically a scatter plot, absolutely any scatter plot that has time as the independent variable. So down here on the x-axis. So there are several different ways of describing these time series. There can be a general upwards trend, so all the values can slowly be increasing. Alternatively, you could have all the values kind of slowly decreasing, so it would look more like this. You can have seasonal patterns. So you can have patterns where you have down points and up points that perfectly line up with times of the year. And you can have cyclical patterns. So there's no regular periods between the peaks, but you'll have periods where there's a peak and a periods where there's a low, another peak and another low. So it goes up and down and up and down. And then you can have random patterns where there's just no organization. It goes up, it goes down, it stays flat. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to what's happening. And the final one is you can have a combination of any of these different types of patterns. So in this case, you have a seasonal where it goes up and down based on the time of the year, but it's also slowly going up every year. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we can use Excel for these time series graphs. Okay, so I've got a table here that shows us the year level, and then it shows us the number of people who moved from Newcastle to Sydney within each of these years. Okay, so remember, entering data into Excel, all you have to do is type that data in, no problem. If you see some pattern like this where it's going up once every year, don't forget, if you select each of these and you scroll down to this part over this box, when you see your little grabber go down like that, you can go down and just quickly get it in like that to type them in. So that's just an easy way to enter it in. Okay, so if you want to make a time series graph, what you need to do is select your data. If they're right beside each other, it's easy. You just scroll down over each one. If they're not, what you can do is you scroll down until you select your first one, press Control, and then select your second set of data. Okay, so once you've got your data set selected, you go under Insert, the down arrow of the graph, and then you can pick the one that it lines up with the dot points and the lines. This is the one that I prefer. Okay, so there's our graph. Now, what you can do is add all sorts of things. You've already got your chart title, which if you click in, you can change the name. You go to this plus sign here, and you can add, let's see, we can add a legend, which tells us what we have. We can add in the axis titles, always a good idea. We can also add in a trend line here. So if we add in a trend line, that's showing us not only we've got the exact data points, but we've got a line of best fit, which is a pretty helpful thing too. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll over here to one that I've already made. So I've got all my nice chart title, axis titles, and now we're going to add a trend line. Okay, so I want to show my trend line there. Good. Okay, now if I want to, just scroll over here a bit. Okay, if I want to double click on this trend line, I can add some interesting things with that trend line. Now, if you scroll down here, so I click on this little triple bars thing, you can see down here, if you display equation on chart, that will actually display that line of best fit. So where in the last lesson you weren't calculating just by hand, Excel will actually do that for you, which is a pretty useful tool. You can also click this display R-squared value on the chart, and this will display your correlation. Now we're going to go over what that correlation means in just a minute, but just remember that that's the way that you get it. Okay, the other thing, here we go, correlation yet again. So the correlation is how much the x and the y, or the independent and the dependent variables, are related to each other. So if you type equals and start typing COR, correl, returns the correlation coefficient between two data sets. So if we double click on that, okay, my first array, my first data set is my time, my independent variable. I put in a comma, and then I'm onto my second array here. So my second array is the number of people who have moved. So I select those, close my bracket, press enter, and my correlation is 0.87. Okay, so correlation. Let's now take a look at what 0.87 correlation means. Okay, so we just looked at how to find the correlation coefficient in in Excel. Now we're going to understand what the correlation coefficient, what that R value or R square value means. Okay, so the correlation, don't forget, that's how linked two variables are. A value of 1 means that you have a high positive correlation. And if you look at this graph here, a negative 1 means a high negative correlation. So on this diagram here, you have 0 correlation. There's absolutely no link between your independent and your dependent variable. If you changed one, it wouldn't at all affect the other one. Now you can see here you have a positive slope. So as the independent variable increases, so too does the dependent variable. Okay, so a high positive correlation, and a negative 1. As the x variable increases, that y value is actually decreasing. So it's a negative 1. Now it's important to note that the correlation has all to do with the noisiness. So you can see the correlation is a bit lower here, a 0.8 value. It's because it doesn't really look like a perfect line. And it's negative to show that as the independent variable is increasing, the dependent variable is decreasing. The 0.8 here, it basically the line form or the line that you would pick, it looks a bit noisy. If you look at 0.4, the line form is even more noisy. So if you drew your line of best fit, which would fit somewhere here, you would have a lot of dots that don't quite line up. Okay, so just to further emphasize this, each of these line forms here, you can see how the slope is constantly changing. Their correlations, the value or the magnitude of the correlation is always 1, but you can see that the slope has changed. So it's all to do with the noisiness, okay? Which dots don't line up on that line as opposed to the slope of it. Okay, so now we want to look at how we can use the information of the time series data. Okay, so I've got this graph off the internet. The median house and unit values for Agnes Water. Okay, so they've given us these prices to buy basically a house and a unit in Agnes over the last 6 years. So if we take a look at it, the median house price has gone pretty steadily down, and it's dropped about $80,000 in 6 years. So that's pretty significant. If you look at unit prices, the prices stayed fairly steady just along here, and it's even its general trend is slightly upwards. So if you were looking at possibly buying like an investment property or something, you would probably at this point think, okay, I could probably make more money off of a unit versus a house, because the house is trending downwards, whereas the unit is trending upwards. Another important one, we have cyclical patterns. Okay, in this case, we've got the cyclical pattern of buying chocolates and consuming chocolate, and I realize those months are pretty low, but you can see the months of the year going along. As time goes on, it goes up and down, and there's a pretty serious spike about once a year. These spikes here, you can take a look at when they each occur, and it's right around Christmas time. So somebody who's trying to sell a lot of chocolate, say they own a chocolate store or you're working at Cadbury, you need to know that you need to produce a heck of a lot more chocolate at that Christmas period, and also budget yourself so that you have enough money to make it through those slow periods. So time series data, you can get a lot of really important information just by reading that graph. And that's the end of this lesson.